My name is Thomas Blackwood, and I fix computers for a living. Not the glamorous kind of tech work you see in movies. I crawl under desks, untangle cables, and explain to middle managers why their passwords can't be password 123. It's honest work that pays the bills and keeps my hands busy, which is more than I can say for most people these days. The night everything changed started like any other. I was in the driveway at midnight wrestling with my Honda's transmission when Adrienne appeared in the garage doorway. She looked pale, almost ghostly in the fluorescent light, clutching her robe tight around her shoulders. "Tom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I might be pregnant. I need space to process this." I wiped my hands on an old rag, studying her face. Adrienne worked as a senior manager at Hartwell and Associates, one of those law firms downtown with marble lobbies and partners who drive cars worth more than my annual salary. She was good at reading people, good at presenting information in ways that got the results she wanted. Right now, she was presenting vulnerability with surgical precision. "Take your time," I said, because that's what a supportive husband says. "Whatever you need to figure this out." She nodded, relief flooding her features. "Thank you for understanding. I just need some space to think about what this means for us, for our future." I watched her retreat into the house, noting how quickly her posture straightened once she thought I couldn't see her anymore. 20 years of marriage teaches you things about a person. Adrienne was many things: ambitious, intelligent, occasionally ruthless in her professional dealings, but she'd never been uncertain about anything important. The woman who'd negotiated our mortgage terms with the precision of a contract attorney was now claiming she needed processing time for a maybe pregnancy. The next morning, I found the test in the bathroom trash. Negative. One clear, unambiguous line that required no interpretation, no processing, no space to contemplate. I held the plastic stick up to the light, confirming what I already knew. No pregnancy existed to contemplate. No future required discussion. No space was actually needed, which meant last night's performance had been exactly that, a performance. I sat on the edge of our bed, turning the test over in my hands. Adrienne had already left for work, her coffee mug rinsed and placed in the dishwasher with characteristic efficiency. She'd kissed my cheek and reminded me about Carly's parent-teacher conference next week, playing the role of concerned wife and mother with the same calculated precision she'd used to deliver her pregnancy announcement. My phone buzzed, a text from Adrienne. "Still processing everything. Might be late tonight. Don't wait up." Processing. That word was starting to irritate me. I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in 3 years, and spent the day thinking. If Adrienne wasn't pregnant, what exactly was she processing? And where would someone go to process feelings that couldn't be processed at home, with the husband who'd supposedly fathered the non-existent child? By evening, I had my answer. Or at least, I had a plan to get my answer. My Honda might have transmission problems, but it ran quiet enough for surveillance work. I parked 2 blocks from Adrienne's office building and waited. Her silver Lexus emerged from the parking garage at 6:47 p.m., right on schedule. I followed at a distance, using skills I'd learned from too many detective novels and not enough real-world experience. She didn't head home. Instead, she drove across town to Meridian Heights, an apartment complex where young professionals lived before they could afford houses in the suburbs. I watched her park in a visitor space and check her reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothing her hair with the careful attention of someone preparing for an important meeting. Or a date. She disappeared into Building C, Unit 2B, according to the directory I checked after she'd gone inside. The name next to 2B read S. Harrington, Stephen Harrington, her co-worker. The same Stephen Harrington she'd mentioned casually over dinner conversations, the one who joined the firm 6 months ago, the one who was so dedicated and really understands the complex cases. I settled in to wait, my car positioned where I could see the building entrance and the lighted windows of Unit 2B. The lights were on. Adrienne was inside. Processing. The hours crawled by. I watched other residents come and go, couples returning from dinner dates, dog walkers making their evening rounds, delivery drivers navigating the maze of buildings with packages and takeout orders. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that my marriage was dissolving in real time 2 floors above the parking lot. At 11:30 p.m., I saw movement in the apartment window. Shadows against the curtains, 2 figures moving in what looked like an animated conversation, or an argument, or something else entirely that I didn't want to contemplate. At 2:47 a.m., the apartment lights went out. At 3:03 a.m., Adrienne emerged from the building, walking with the careful steps of someone who'd been thoroughly exhausted by her processing session. She sat in her car for several minutes before starting the engine, probably composing herself for the drive home to her unsuspecting husband. I followed her back to our house, maintaining distance until she pulled into our driveway. I parked around the corner and walked home, slipping through the back door while she was still gathering her things from the car. By the time she crept into our bedroom, I was pretending to sleep, breathing steady and deep, like a man who'd spent the evening watching television and going to bed at a reasonable hour. She slipped under the covers without waking me, or without trying to wake me. Her hair smelled like unfamiliar cologne, and her skin was warm with recent activity. Processing, apparently, was physically demanding work. The next morning, I placed the negative pregnancy test on her pillow while she showered. Not hidden, not tucked under anything, just lying there in plain sight, impossible to miss or misinterpret. When she emerged from the bathroom, towel wrapped around her hair, she froze, her eyes fixed on the test, and I watched her face cycle through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been fear. "You found it," she said. "I did. Tom, I can explain. I'm sure you can." I stood up, straightening my work shirt. "You're good at explaining things, Adrienne. It's what you do for a living." She sat on the bed, still staring at the test. "It's not what you think. What I think is that you lied to me about being pregnant so you could spend the night processing your feelings at Stephen Harrington's apartment until 3 in the morning. What I think is that you've been processing quite a lot lately, considering all those late nights at the office." Her face went pale. "You followed me. I gave you space, just like you asked. I just wanted to make sure you had enough of it." For the first time in 20 years of marriage, Adrienne Blackwood was speechless. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The woman who could argue contract terms with corporate attorneys couldn't find words to explain why she'd spent 6 hours processing non-existent pregnancy feelings with her coworker. "We need to talk," she finally managed. "No," I said, heading for the door. "You need to process. I need to go to work." I left her sitting on the bed, holding the negative test that had started this whole mess. As I drove to work, I found myself thinking about processing, about how some results come back negative and how some tests reveal exactly what you suspected they would. Adrienne had tested positive for dishonesty. The question now was what I planned to do with that information. Work was impossible. I sat in my cubicle at Datatech Solutions, staring at a computer screen filled with help desk tickets, but my mind kept returning to that apartment window and the shadows moving behind the curtains. Every few minutes, I'd check my phone, hoping for some message from Adrienne that might explain everything in a way that didn't involve her processing feelings with another man until 3 in the morning. No messages came. Around lunch, I decided to conduct a little research. Stephen Harrington wasn't hard to find online. Lawyers love their professional profiles. LinkedIn showed a 38-year-old corporate attorney with an expensive smile and a background at firms in Boston and Hartford. His bio mentioned his passion for complex litigation and challenging cases, which apparently included my wife. His social media presence was carefully curated but revealing. Photos from the firm's holiday party showed him standing close to Adrienne, her hand resting on his arm in a way that suggested familiarity. Another photo from a client dinner showed them sharing what looked like an inside joke, both leaning toward each other while other colleagues focused on their meals. I scrolled through months of posts looking for patterns. Stephen had joined Hartwell and Associates in March. The same month, Adrian had started working later hours. His welcome party had been in early April, around the time Adrian had mentioned how dedicated her new colleague was. By May, she was staying late 3 nights a week, helping Stephen get up to speed on complex cases. The timeline painted a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. "Can we talk tonight? I know how this looks, but there's more to the situation." I stared at the message, analyzing her word choices. "How this looks" implied she understood the optics were bad, but not necessarily that she'd done anything wrong. "More to the situation" suggested complications I hadn't considered, layers of explanation that might justify 6 hours of processing at another man's apartment. I typed back, "Sure, I'll be home by 6. But first, I had more research to do. During my lunch break, I drove to Meridian Heights. In daylight, the apartment complex looked different, newer, more expensive than I'd realized. The kind of place where young professionals paid premium rent for granite countertops and fitness centers they'd never use. Stephen Harrington's building was the nicest of the 4, with a view of the small lake that gave the complex its marketing appeal. I parked in a visitor's space and walked around, getting a feel for the layout. The mailboxes confirmed what I already knew: S. Harrington in 2B, along with about 40 other residents who probably had no idea their neighbor was helping married women process unexpected pregnancy results. Back at work, I found myself thinking about Adrienne's explanation. What could possibly justify her behavior? What, more to the situation, could make lying about pregnancy and spending the night at another man's apartment seem reasonable? By 5:30, I'd constructed several scenarios, each more unlikely than the last. Maybe Stephen was gay and Adrienne was helping him with a personal crisis. Maybe they were working on a case so sensitive it required absolute secrecy. Maybe Adrienne was having some kind of breakdown and Stephen was the only colleague she trusted enough to confide in. None of these explanations felt right, but I was willing to listen. 20 years of marriage had to count for something. I arrived home to find Adrienne in the kitchen, preparing what looked like my favorite dinner, pot roast with vegetables, the kind of meal she usually reserved for special occasions or apologies. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a sweater, looking younger and more vulnerable than she had in months. "Tom," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Thank you for coming home, for being willing to talk." I sat at the kitchen table, watching her move around the kitchen with nervous energy. "I'm listening." She took a deep breath, composing herself the way she did before difficult conversations with clients. "First, I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. The situation with Stephen, it's complicated." "Complicated how?" "He's been having problems with his ex-wife, custody issues with his daughter. He needed someone to talk to, someone who understood legal complications." She stirred the vegetables with unnecessary attention. "I've been helping him navigate the situation." "At 3 in the morning?" "Time gets away from you when you're dealing with emotional issues. His ex-wife has been calling at all hours, making threats about the custody arrangement. I stayed to help him document everything for his attorney." I nodded, processing this explanation. It was plausible, even reasonable. Divorce and custody battles were messy, complicated things that often required long conversations and detailed documentation. If Stephen was struggling with his ex-wife, Adrienne's legal expertise would be valuable. "What about the pregnancy test?" I asked. She turned to face me, her expression carefully controlled. "I was late. I panicked. I bought the test but couldn't bring myself to take it immediately. When I finally did and it was negative, I was so relieved I didn't think clearly about how to tell you." "So you lied about maybe being pregnant?" "I was scared, Tom. Scared about what another child would mean for us, for our future. When the test was negative, I needed time to process my feelings about the whole situation, about how much the possibility had terrified me. Her explanation had the ring of truth, or at least partial truth. We'd talked about having another child years ago, before deciding that Carly and Liam were enough. An unexpected pregnancy at this stage would have been complicated, disruptive to the life we'd built. But something still felt wrong. The timeline, the secrecy, the way she'd performed vulnerability the night before, it all felt too calculated, too convenient. "Why Stephen's apartment?" I asked. "Why not talk to me about your feelings?" "Because I knew you'd want to fix everything immediately. You'd want to plan and organize and make decisions before I'd figured out what I was feeling." She sat across from me, reaching for my hands. Stephen just listened. He didn't try to solve anything or tell me what I should feel. I looked at our joined hands, thinking about the shadows I'd seen in the apartment window, the way she'd checked her reflection before going inside, the cologne scent in her hair when she'd come home. "Are you having an affair?" I asked directly. "No," she said without hesitation. "Tom, I would never do that to you, to our family. Stephen is a colleague and a friend who needed help with a difficult situation. That's all." I wanted to believe her. The alternative, that my wife of 20 years was lying to my face while holding my hands, was too painful to fully accept. But doubt had taken root, and doubt has a way of growing in the dark spaces between words. "Okay," I said finally. "I believe you." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. I know how it must have looked, but I promise you, there's nothing inappropriate happening between Stephen and me." We ate dinner in relative peace, talking about normal things: Carly's college applications, Liam's soccer season, the leak in the basement that I needed to fix. Adrienne seemed more relaxed than she had in weeks, as if confessing her fears about the pregnancy scare had lifted a weight from her shoulders. But as we cleaned up the dishes, I found myself watching her movements, listening to her words with new attention. The woman I'd married was honest to a fault, sometimes brutally so. The woman sitting across from me had just spent 20 minutes explaining why she'd lied about being pregnant and spent the night at another man's apartment. People change over 20 years. Maybe Adrienne had learned that sometimes the truth was more complicated than honesty could handle. Maybe I was being paranoid, looking for deception where only fear and confusion existed. Or maybe my wife was a better liar than I'd ever imagined. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered which version was true. In the morning, I decided to find out. I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. Adrienne's schedule, her phone habits, the way she talked about work. Everything became potential evidence in a case I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The first thing I noticed was her newfound dedication to fitness. 3 mornings a week, she left for the gym at 6 a.m., returning with the glow of someone who'd had an excellent workout. She'd never been particularly interested in exercise before, claiming her job provided enough stress to keep her metabolism active. "It's important to stay healthy," she explained when I commented on her new routine. "Stephen mentioned that his gym has excellent equipment and reasonable rates." Stephen's gym. Of course. The second thing I noticed was her phone behavior. Adrienne had always been casual about her device, leaving it on counters while she cooked or charged it openly on her nightstand. Now it lived in her purse or pocket, always within reach, always face down when she set it aside. When it buzzed during dinner, she'd glance at it with the quick attention of someone expecting important communications. "Work stuff," she'd say, but she never answered the calls or responded to the texts while I was watching. The third thing I noticed was her improved mood. For someone who'd recently experienced a pregnancy scare and was helping a colleague through a difficult custody battle, Adrienne seemed remarkably cheerful. She hummed while getting ready for work, smiled at private thoughts, and showed more energy than I'd seen from her in months. People don't usually get happier when their lives become more complicated, unless the complications are the kind that make you feel alive again. I decided to test my suspicions. "How's Stephen doing with his custody situation?" I asked one evening while we watched television. "Better," she said, without looking away from the screen. "His attorney thinks they can reach an agreement without going to court." "That's good. What's his daughter's name again?" A pause. Brief, but noticeable. "Emma. She's 7. I nodded, filing the information away. The next day, I did some research on Stephen Harrington's divorce proceedings. Public records are wonderful things when you know where to look, and my job had taught me how to navigate databases most people never knew existed. Stephen Harrington had been divorced for 3 years. His custody arrangement had been finalized 2 years ago. He had no daughter named Emma. His only child was a son named Michael, age 12, who lived with his mother in Connecticut. Adrienne had lied. Again. That evening, I tried a different approach. "I was thinking we should have Stephen over for dinner sometime. It sounds like he's been a good friend to you." "Oh, that's sweet of you to offer," she said, but I caught the flash of panic in her eyes. "But he's very private about his personal life. I don't think he'd be comfortable with that." "Maybe just drinks then. I'd like to meet the person who's been helping my wife through difficult times." "Let me think about it," she said, which we both knew meant no. I spent the next week documenting Adrienne's schedule with the methodical attention I usually reserved for troubleshooting network problems. She left for the gym Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m., returning by 8 a.m. She worked late Tuesday and Thursday, arriving home after 9 p.m. with takeout dinners and apologies for missing family time. On Saturday morning, she announced she needed to go into the office for a few hours to help Stephen prepare for a Monday meeting. "On the weekend?" I asked. "Unfortunately, yes. This case has a tight deadline, and Stephen needs help reviewing the documentation." She left at 10 a.m., dressed in jeans and a sweater that showed more skin than her usual weekend attire. I waited 30 minutes, then followed. She didn't go to the office. Instead, she drove to a restaurant across town, the kind of place with outdoor seating and a reputation for excellent brunch. I parked where I could see the entrance and waited. At 10:47 a.m., Stephen Harrington arrived. He was taller than I'd expected, with the kind of confident posture that comes from expensive suits and regular gym sessions. He wore khakis and a polo shirt that emphasized his build, and he moved with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never had to crawl under a desk to fix someone else's mistakes. Through the restaurant's large windows, I watched them settle at a corner table. Adrienne sat with her back to the window, but I could see Stephen's face clearly. He was animated, gesturing as he talked, leaning forward with the intense attention of someone completely focused on his companion. This wasn't a business meeting. Business meetings don't involve lingering touches when passing menus, don't include the kind of intimate laughter I could see shaking Adrienne's shoulders, don't last 2.5 hours with multiple coffee refills and shared desserts. I took photos. Not many, just enough to document what I was seeing. Evidence for a case I was building without knowing what verdict I wanted. When they finally left the restaurant, they walked to their cars together. Stephen said something that made Adrienne laugh. Then he touched her arm in a gesture that was casual and familiar. They stood close together for several minutes, talking in the intimate way of people who shared secrets. Then Adrienne got in her car and drove home to tell me about her productive morning at the office, helping Stephen prepare for his important Monday meeting. I arrived home 10 minutes after she did, carrying groceries I'd purchased as an alibi for my absence. "How was the office?" I asked. "Productive," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We got a lot accomplished." "Good. Stephen seems like a dedicated colleague." "He is. Very professional." I unpacked groceries while she showered, thinking about the word professional and how it applied to 2.5-hour brunches with intimate conversation and lingering touches. That evening, I made a decision. I was tired of collecting evidence for a case I already understood. Adrienne was having an affair with Stephen Harrington, had been having an affair for months, and was lying to me with the practiced skill of someone who'd gotten comfortable with deception. The question now wasn't whether she was cheating. It was what I planned to do about it. I could confront her directly, demand the truth, and hope for some kind of reconciliation. I could file for divorce, divide our assets, and try to rebuild my life at 42 years old. I could pretend I didn't know and hope the affair burned itself out naturally. Or I could do something else entirely. That night, I lay awake thinking about processing, about how Adrienne had used that word to justify her deception, how she'd claimed to need space and time to handle her feelings about a pregnancy that never existed. Maybe it was time for me to do some processing of my own. Maybe I needed space to figure out exactly how I felt about being married to a woman who could lie to my face while holding my hands and promising there was nothing inappropriate happening between her and Stephen. Maybe Stephen Harrington needed to understand that some husbands process betrayal differently than others. Maybe Adrienne needed to learn that asking for space can be dangerous when you don't specify what kind of space you're requesting. I'd given her space to have an affair. Now, I was going to give myself space to decide what came next. Monday morning brought new resolve. I called in sick again. My supervisor was starting to ask questions, but I had bigger concerns than my attendance record. Instead of going to work, I drove to Hartwell and Associates. The law firm occupied 3 floors of a downtown building that screamed success and stability. Marble lobby, expensive artwork, reception desk, staffed by someone who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. The kind of place where Adrienne felt important, where Stephen Harrington could afford to take married women to expensive brunches. I didn't go inside. Instead, I positioned myself across the street with a coffee and a newspaper, watching the building entrance like a private investigator in a bad movie. The difference was that private investigators get paid for this kind of surveillance. I was doing it for free, driven by curiosity and a growing need to understand exactly what my wife's professional life looked like. At 11:30 a.m., Adrienne and Stephen emerged together. She was laughing at something he'd said, walking close enough that their shoulders bumped as they navigated the crowded sidewalk. They moved with the comfortable synchronization of people who spent significant time together, who knew each other's rhythms and habits. They went to lunch at a bistro 2 blocks away, sitting at the same corner table they'd occupied during Saturday's business meeting. From my position across the street, I watched them share appetizers and lean across the table for intimate conversation. Adrienne touched his hand when she talked, and Stephen listened with the focused attention of someone completely captivated by his companion. This wasn't a colleague relationship. This was courtship, romance, the kind of connection that makes people forget they're married to other people. I took more photos, building a documentation file that was becoming harder to ignore. When they returned to the office building, Stephen's hand rested briefly on the small of Adrienne's back as he held the door open, a gesture that was protective, possessive, and entirely inappropriate for professional colleagues. That evening, Adrienne came home with stories about her busy day, the challenging cases she was working on, the demanding clients who required her complete attention. She seemed energized by her work, more engaged and enthusiastic than she'd been in years. "How's Stephen adjusting to the firm?" I asked during dinner. "Really well. He's brought some innovative approaches to complex litigation. The partners are impressed with his work." "Sounds like you two make a good team." "We do. We have similar approaches to problem solving, similar work ethics. It's rare to find a colleague who really understands your professional perspective." I nodded, thinking about understanding and perspective and the various ways people can work together. "Maybe I should stop by the office sometime, meet some of your colleagues." The suggestion clearly made her uncomfortable. "Oh, you don't need to do that. Everyone's so busy and the office environment is pretty formal. It wouldn't be very interesting for you." "I'm interested in your work, Adrienne. I'd like to see where you spend so much of your time." "Maybe sometime," she said, which again meant no. After dinner, I retreated to my home office and began researching Stephen Harrington more thoroughly. Social media profiles, professional associations, public records. I compiled information with the systematic approach I used for complex technical problems. Stephen had been married for 8 years before his divorce. His ex-wife, Patricia, lived in Connecticut with their son, Michael. The divorce had been finalized 3 years ago, with a settlement that suggested Stephen earned significantly more than I did. He drove a BMW, lived in an expensive apartment, and belonged to a gym that charged more per month than I spent on groceries. He was successful, attractive, and available. Everything a married woman might find appealing when her own life felt routine and predictable. I found his personal email address through a professional directory and spent an hour crafting a message that would get his attention without revealing my identity. Stephen, I know about you and Adrienne Blackwood. We need to talk. Meet me at Murphy's Bar on 5th Street tomorrow at 8 p.m. Come alone. I signed it, A Concerned Party, and hit send before I could reconsider. Murphy's Bar was the kind of establishment where working-class men went to forget their problems with cheap drinks and loud music. Stephen Harrington would be as out of place as a BMW in a junkyard, which was exactly what I wanted. Home field advantage. The next evening, I arrived early and positioned myself where I could see the entrance. Murphy's was busy for a Tuesday night, filled with construction workers and mechanics and other men who solved problems with their hands instead of their law degrees. I nursed a drink and waited. Stephen arrived at exactly 8 p.m., scanning the room with obvious discomfort. He was dressed in business casual, khakis and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than my weekly salary. When he didn't immediately see anyone who looked like they might be his mysterious correspondent, he approached the bar and ordered what looked like an expensive whiskey. I gave him 10 minutes to get nervous, then approached. Stephen Harrington? He turned, taking in my work clothes and calloused hands. Yes. Are you the person who sent the email? I am. Thanks for coming. Who are you? Thomas Blackwood, Adrienne's husband. The color drained from his face. He set down his drink and looked around the room as if calculating escape routes. Mr. Blackwood, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Has there? What kind of misunderstanding involves my wife spending 6 hours at your apartment, lying about pregnancy tests, and having intimate lunches while claiming to work on complex litigation? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a lawyer, he was remarkably bad at thinking on his feet when confronted with evidence. Adrienne and I are colleagues, he finally managed. If you're implying something inappropriate, you're mistaken. Am I? Because I have photos of your colleague behavior, touching, laughing, sharing desserts, very professional stuff. Mr. Blackwood, I understand you might be concerned about— I'm not concerned, I interrupted. I'm informed. There's a difference. Stephen straightened, trying to recover his composure. What do you want? I want you to understand that Adrienne is married. To me. For 20 years. We have 2 children together, a house, a life that you're currently complicating. I'm not complicating anything. Adrienne is an adult who makes her own decisions. True. But you're also an adult who makes decisions. Like the decision to pursue a married woman. Like the decision to help her lie to her family. Like the decision to meet with her husband in a bar instead of ending whatever this is before it goes any further. He took a sip of his whiskey, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. I don't know what you think is happening between Adrienne and me, but I think you're having an affair with my wife. I think it's been going on for months. I think you both believe I'm too stupid or too trusting to figure it out. That's not— Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to end this. Whatever relationship you think you have with Adrienne, it's over. You're going to transfer to a different department, or find a new job, or do whatever you need to do to remove yourself from her daily life. Stephen's expression shifted from nervous to defiant. You can't tell me what to do, and you can't control your wife's choices. You're right. I can't control Adrian's choices, but I can make sure you understand the consequences of yours. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. Adrian has a family, a life, responsibilities that don't include you. If you care about her at all, you'll let her focus on those things instead of whatever fantasy you two have constructed. Stephen finished his whiskey and set the glass down with more force than necessary. I think this conversation is over. It is. But Stephen, if I find out you're still processing feelings with my wife, we'll have another conversation. One that won't be as polite as this one. He left without another word, pushing through the crowd with obvious eagerness to escape. I finished my drink slowly, thinking about consequences and reality, and the various ways people respond to uncomfortable truths. When I got home, Adrienne was in bed reading, looking peaceful and content. She glanced up when I entered the bedroom, smiling with genuine warmth. "How was your evening?" she asked. "Educational," I said. "Very educational." The next morning, Adrienne's behavior changed dramatically. She was distracted during breakfast, checking her phone constantly, and barely responding to Carly's complaints about her chemistry teacher. When Stephen called at 7:30 a.m., she answered immediately and took the conversation into the other room. I couldn't hear the words, but her tone was urgent, almost frantic. The call lasted 15 minutes, ending with what sounded like frustrated goodbyes. "Everything okay?" I asked when she returned to the kitchen. "Fine, just work stuff." But she wouldn't meet my eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she poured coffee. Stephen had told her about our conversation. Now they were both processing the new reality of their situation, trying to figure out how to continue their affair under the scrutiny of a suspicious husband. I decided to make their processing more difficult. That afternoon, I created a fake email account and sent a message to the managing partners at Hartwell and Associates. The subject line read, "Concerns about professional conduct." The message was carefully worded, expressing anonymous concerns about the appropriateness of the relationship between two specific employees. I included no accusations, no demands for action, just observations about behavior that might warrant attention from supervisory staff. I didn't mention names directly, but I provided enough details about scheduling and interactions that any competent investigation would identify Adrienne and Stephen quickly. Then I waited. The response came faster than I'd expected. Thursday morning, Adrienne received a phone call that sent her into the bathroom with the door locked, speaking in urgent whispers for nearly an hour. When she emerged, she looked pale and shaken. "I have to go to work early today," she announced. "There's been some kind of situation." "What kind of situation?" "I'm not sure yet. Some concerns were raised about office protocols, and the partners want to discuss them with several employees." I nodded sympathetically. "That sounds stressful." "It is, especially since the concerns seem to be based on misunderstandings about professional relationships." "Misunderstandings can usually be cleared up pretty easily," I offered, "especially when people have nothing to hide." She looked at me sharply, as if hearing something in my tone that hadn't been there before. "Yes, exactly." Adrienne left for work an hour earlier than usual, her movements quick and nervous. I gave her a 30-minute head start, then drove to the office building and positioned myself across the street with my usual coffee and newspaper. At 10:15 a.m., Stephen emerged from the building alone, walking with the rigid posture of someone under significant stress. He got into his BMW and drove away, not toward his apartment, but toward the highway that led out of town. At 11:30 a.m., Adrienne appeared in the building's lobby, talking animatedly with an older woman in an expensive suit who looked like she could reduce grown attorneys to tears with a raised eyebrow. The conversation lasted several minutes, ending with what appeared to be stern instructions from the older woman. When Adrienne finally left the building, she walked like someone who'd just received very bad news. That evening, she came home exhausted and defeated. She barely touched dinner, responding to family conversation with distracted nods and one-word answers. When Carly asked about her day, Adrian's response was sharp enough that our daughter retreated to her room with wounded confusion. "Rough day at work?" I asked after the kids had disappeared upstairs. "The worst." She rubbed her temples like she was fighting a headache. "Someone made complaints about office conduct. Anonymous complaints that forced the partners to investigate relationships between colleagues. That sounds serious. It was humiliating. Having to sit in a conference room while senior partners asked questions about my interactions with coworkers, my scheduling, my professional judgment." "What kind of questions?" "Whether I'd been maintaining appropriate boundaries with colleagues, whether my work relationships had become too personal, whether I understood the firm's policies about professional conduct." I made sympathetic noises while internally celebrating the effectiveness of anonymous complaints. "The worst part," Adrienne continued, "is that someone clearly observed my behavior closely enough to provide specific details about meetings, lunches, conversations. Someone was watching me, documenting my activities. That's disturbing. Any idea who might do something like that?" She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "No, but it feels personal, targeted. Maybe it's just someone who misunderstood innocent professional interactions. Maybe." But her tone suggested she didn't believe that any more than I did. Over the next few days, Adrienne's routine changed completely. No more early morning gym sessions, no more late nights at the office, no more weekend meetings or urgent calls from Stephen. She came home immediately after work, spent evenings with the family, and seemed to be making an effort to rebuild the domestic routine she'd been neglecting. But she was also watching me with new attention, studying my reactions to her stories about work, analyzing my questions about her schedule. The woman who'd been lying to me for months was now suspicious that I might not be entirely honest with her. The irony was almost amusing. On Saturday morning, she announced that she needed to run errands, grocery shopping, dry cleaning, the usual weekend tasks. But instead of leaving immediately, she lingered in the kitchen, watching me read the newspaper. "Tom, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Have you been concerned about my work relationships? About the time I've been spending with colleagues?" I looked up from the sports section, projecting mild confusion. "Should I be concerned?" "No, of course not. I just wondered if you'd noticed anything that seemed inappropriate." "Like what?" "I don't know. Anything that might make you think I was too close to coworkers or spending too much time on work relationships?" I considered the question with apparent seriousness. "You've been working a lot lately, but I assumed that was just the demands of your job." "Why?" "The complaints at work mentioned specific details about my behavior, details that suggested someone had been observing me very carefully." "Someone from the office?" "Maybe. Or someone else who had access to information about my schedule, my activities." She was fishing, trying to determine if I knew more than I was admitting. The conversation felt like a chess match where both players were pretending not to understand the rules. "That's weird," I said finally. "But I'm sure the partners will figure out who made the complaints and why." "I hope so. It's unsettling to think someone was watching me without my knowledge." "I can imagine. Privacy is important, especially when people might misinterpret innocent behavior." She nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Yes, innocent behavior that could look suspicious to someone who didn't understand the context." "Context is everything," I agreed. "Good thing you and Stephen can explain the context of your professional relationship." Her face went completely still. "What do you mean?" "Just that if someone complained about your interactions with him specifically, you can both clarify that everything was appropriate and professional." "How did you know the complaints were about Stephen?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I'd made a mistake, revealed knowledge I shouldn't have possessed. Now we were both pretending not to understand what was really happening. "Lucky guess," I said. "You mentioned he was the colleague you'd been helping with his custody situation. If someone was concerned about professional boundaries, they might misunderstand your efforts to help him." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind working, processing possibilities and implications. Yes, she said finally. That's probably it. But we both knew it wasn't. The pretense became unbearable. For 2 weeks, Adrienne and I circled each other like suspicious cats, each knowing the other was hiding something, neither willing to break the stalemate with direct confrontation. She continued her reformed schedule, home for dinner, present for family activities, no mysterious phone calls or urgent work emergencies. But the effort felt performative, like she was playing the role of devoted wife and mother, while her real attention was elsewhere. I continued my surveillance, though it had become largely unnecessary. Stephen's BMW no longer appeared at restaurants where Adrienne happened to be having lunch. Her phone stayed silent during family time. Whatever relationship they'd been conducting had either ended or gone deeper underground. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late October. Adrienne was helping Liam with his homework while I cleaned up after dinner, both of us maintaining the domestic routine that had become our shared performance. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it with the quick attention that had become habitual. This time, her reaction was different. Her face went pale, then flushed with what looked like anger or fear. She excused herself and took the phone into the other room, but her voice carried through the thin walls of our house. "You can't do this now," she was saying. "We agreed to wait until things settled down." A pause, then, "I don't care what you're feeling. The timing is impossible." Another pause. "No, absolutely not. Tom is already suspicious, and the office situation is barely under control." I moved closer to the doorway, abandoning any pretense of not listening. "Stephen, you need to be patient. This is complicated, and rushing things will ruin everything we've worked for." Everything they'd worked for. The phrase hit me like cold water, washing away the last remnants of doubt about what I'd been witnessing. This wasn't a casual affair that had gotten out of hand. This was a planned relationship, something they'd both invested in, something with goals and strategies and long-term implications. "I can't leave him right now," Adrienne continued. "The kids, the house, the financial situation, it all has to be handled carefully." She was planning to leave me, not just having an affair, but actively working toward ending our marriage. The late nights, the lies, the careful performance of the last 2 weeks. It had all been preparation for a future that didn't include me. I backed away from the door and returned to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I loaded dishes into the dishwasher. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a life we'd built together, and she was discussing it like a business transaction that required careful timing and strategic planning. When she returned to the kitchen, her expression was carefully neutral. "Sorry about that. Work call." "This late? You know how it is. Clients don't respect normal business hours." I nodded, accepting the lie because the truth was too large to address in a kitchen conversation. "Everything okay?" "Fine. Just the usual complications." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Adrienne slept beside me. Her breathing was steady and peaceful, like someone with a clear conscience. But I knew better now. The woman next to me was planning to destroy our family, and she was sleeping soundly while she did it. The next morning, I made a decision. I called in sick to work and spent the day preparing. I transferred money from our joint accounts to a personal account Adrienne didn't know about. I copied important documents, insurance policies, tax returns, financial statements. I researched divorce attorneys and made appointments for consultations the following week. But most importantly, I decided to stop pretending I didn't know what was happening. That evening, I waited until the kids were upstairs doing homework, then sat across from Adrienne at the kitchen table. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing what she claimed were case files. "About what?" "About Stephen Harrington. About your affair. About your plans to leave me." The laptop screen reflected in her eyes as she processed my words. For a moment, She looked like she might continue the charade, maintain the lies that had sustained us for months. Then something shifted in her expression, and I saw her make the decision to stop pretending. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Months. Since the night you spent 6 hours processing your fake pregnancy at his apartment." She closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. "You followed me. I gave you space, just like you asked. I wanted to see how you used it. And you've been watching me ever since. I've been trying to understand what happened to my wife. The woman I married wouldn't lie about being pregnant. She wouldn't sneak around with another man. She wouldn't plan to abandon her family." Adrienne was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "What do you want, Tom?" "I want the truth. All of it. How long has this been going on? What are your plans? What happens to Carly and Liam when you decide you're ready to leave?" She took a deep breath, and I could see her shifting into the analytical mode she used for difficult legal negotiations. "Stephen and I have been involved for 6 months. It started as friendship, became something more. We're not planning anything immediate. We both understand that changes need to be handled carefully." "Changes? You mean divorce?" "Eventually, yes. Our marriage hasn't been working for either of us, Tom. We've been going through the motions for years. I thought we were building a life together. We were surviving together. There's a difference." Her words stung because they contained enough truth to be believable. Our marriage had become routine, predictable, comfortable in ways that might have felt limiting to someone who wanted more excitement. "So you found excitement with Stephen. I found someone who sees me as more than a wife and mother. Someone who's interested in my thoughts, my ambitions, my potential. And I don't? When was the last time you asked me about my dreams, Tom? When was the last time we talked about anything more significant than household logistics and the kids' schedules?" I considered the question and realized she was right. Somewhere in 20 years of marriage, we'd stopped being lovers and become business partners, managing a domestic enterprise. "That doesn't justify lying to me," I said, "or planning to leave without discussing problems we might have been able to solve. Some problems can't be solved. Some people grow in different directions. And some people have affairs instead of working on their marriages." She stood up, pacing to the window that looked out on our backyard. "I never meant for it to happen this way, but Stephen makes me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible." "What about our children?" "They'll adjust. Children are resilient, and they deserve to see their parents happy instead of just functional." "You think destroying their family will make them happy?" "I think showing them that people can make difficult choices for the right reasons will teach them important lessons about life." We were arguing in circles, each defending positions that felt reasonable from our respective perspectives. Adrienne saw herself as someone brave enough to pursue happiness. I saw her as someone selfish enough to abandon responsibility. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we figure out how to handle this like adults, how to separate our lives with minimal damage to everyone involved." "Including Stephen?" "Stephen is prepared to be patient while we work through the practical aspects of ending our marriage." I almost laughed at the phrase practical aspects, as if 20 years of shared life could be reduced to logistics and paperwork. "And if I don't want to cooperate with your timeline?" Her expression hardened. "Then things will become more difficult for everyone, but they'll happen anyway, Tom. You can't force someone to stay married." She was right, of course. I could delay the process, make it more expensive and complicated, but I couldn't prevent her from leaving if that's what she'd decided to do. But I could make sure she understood the full cost of her choices. "You're right," I said. "I can't force you to stay married, but I can make sure you don't get to rewrite history. I can make sure everyone knows exactly why our marriage ended." "What does that mean?" "It means Stephen's partners will know he's been having an affair with a married colleague. It means our friends will know you've been lying for months. It means Carly and Liam will understand that their mother chose another man over their family." You wouldn't do that to the children. I wouldn't have to. The truth has a way of coming out, especially when people stop working so hard to hide it. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, both understanding that the conversation had shifted from explanation to negotiation. Adrian wanted to control the narrative of our divorce, to present it as a mutual decision made by two mature adults. I wanted her to face consequences for the choices she'd made. "What do you want?" she asked again. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences, that you can't destroy a family and expect everyone to pretend it was inevitable. And then? Then, we'll see what happens when you try to build a new life on the ruins of the old one." The conversation ended there, both of us understanding that we'd crossed a line from which there was no return. The marriage was over, had been over for months probably, but the ending was going to be more complicated than Adrian had planned. As I watched her gather her laptop and retreat upstairs, I realized that my processing was just beginning. She'd had months to prepare for this moment, to plan her exit strategy and build her new relationship. I'd had one evening to absorb the reality that my life was about to change completely. But I was a quick learner, and I'd always been good at solving complex problems. It was time to show Adrian and Stephen exactly how complex their problem had become. The next few days passed in a strange calm, like the quiet before a storm that everyone knows is coming, but no one wants to acknowledge. Adrian and I maintained the basic functions of family life: meals, school schedules, household maintenance, while carefully avoiding any meaningful conversation about our future. She'd moved into the guest bedroom, claiming she needed space to think clearly about our situation. I didn't object. The pretense of sharing a bed had become more exhausting than the reality of sleeping alone. But I wasn't idle during this period of domestic détente. I was planning. First, I researched Stephen Harrington's professional situation more thoroughly. Hartwell and Associates was a prestigious firm with a reputation for ethical conduct and high standards. Partners took pride in their clean image and would not appreciate having their firm associated with messy personal scandals. Second, I documented everything I'd observed over the past months: dates, times, locations, photographs, all organized into a comprehensive file that told the story of their affair with methodical precision. Third, I prepared for the practical aspects of divorce. I met with 3 attorneys, comparing their approaches and fees, settling on Janet Morrison, a woman with a reputation for aggressive representation and no patience for cheating spouses. "Your wife has been planning this for months," Janet observed after reviewing my documentation. "She's had time to prepare financially and emotionally. We need to make sure you're not disadvantaged by her head start." Janet's strategy was straightforward: file first, seek temporary custody of the children, and make sure Adrian understood that her affair would be a central issue in any settlement negotiations. "The goal isn't revenge," Janet explained. "It's leverage. She wants to control the narrative and the timeline. We're going to make sure she understands that her choices have consequences." On Monday morning, I implemented the first phase of my plan. I called Hartwell and Associates and asked to speak with the managing partner. When his assistant asked about the nature of my call, I explained that I had information about professional conduct issues involving 2 of their attorneys. "This is Thomas Blackwood," I told the managing partner when he came on the line. "I believe we need to discuss the relationship between my wife, Adrienne Blackwood, and Stephen Harrington." The conversation was brief, but productive. The managing partner was clearly uncomfortable with the implications of what I was telling him, but he was also professional enough to understand that the firm needed to address potential liability issues. "We'll look into this immediately," he assured me. "Thank you for bringing it to our attention." Phase 2 involved a conversation with my children. I waited until Adrian was at work, then sat down with Carly and Liam in our living room. At 16 and 14, they were old enough to understand that their parents' marriage was in trouble, but young enough to deserve an explanation that protected them from the ugliest details. "Your mother and I are having serious problems," I began. We're probably going to get divorced." Carly's eyes filled with tears immediately. Liam just stared at me, processing the information with the careful attention he brought to difficult math problems. "Is it because of something we did?" Carly asked. "No, sweetheart. This is about problems between your mother and me, not anything you or Liam did wrong." "Are you going to move out?" Liam wanted to know. "I don't know yet. We're still figuring out how to handle everything, but I want you both to know that no matter what happens between your mother and me, we both love you and will both always be your parents." "Will we have to choose between you?" Carly asked. "I hope not. The goal is to make this as easy as possible for both of you." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. My goal was to make sure Adrienne faced consequences for her choices, and those consequences would inevitably affect our children. That evening, Adrienne came home to find divorce papers waiting on the kitchen table. She stared at the documents for a long moment before looking up at me. "You moved fast. I learned from watching you. Preparation is important when you're planning major life changes." She flipped through the pages, her expression growing more troubled as she read. "You're seeking primary custody. I'm seeking what's best for the children. They need stability, and you've demonstrated that your priorities are elsewhere. My priorities are providing for my family. Your priorities are Stephen Harrington." She set the papers down and rubbed her temples. "Tom, we can handle this civilly. We don't need to make it ugly. You made it ugly when you started lying to me. I'm just making sure everyone understands what really happened." "What does that mean?" "It means your affair is going to be part of the public record. It means Stephen's partners are going to know exactly what kind of professional conduct he's been engaging in. It means our friends and neighbors are going to understand why our marriage ended." Her face went pale. "You can't do that to the children." "I'm not doing anything to the children. You did this when you decided to have an affair instead of working on our marriage. Stephen and I were discreet. No one has to know the details. Discretion doesn't make it less wrong, and I'm not interested in protecting your reputation or Stephen's career." She was quiet for several minutes, reading through the divorce petition and calculating the implications of my demands. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to understand that choices have consequences. You chose to lie to me, to have an affair, to plan the destruction of our family. Now you get to live with the results of those choices. And Stephen? Stephen gets to explain to his partners why he's been having an affair with a married colleague. He gets to find out what happens to lawyers who create liability issues for prestigious firms. You're trying to destroy his career. I'm trying to make sure he understands the cost of his actions, just like you're learning the cost of yours." Adrienne stood up, gathering the divorce papers with shaking hands. "I need to think about this." "Take your time. You're good at processing." She left the kitchen without another word, and I heard her making phone calls from the guest bedroom, urgent, whispered conversations that probably involved Stephen and damage control strategies. But it was too late for damage control. The consequences were already in motion, gathering momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. The next morning, Stephen Harrington was called into a meeting with the managing partners at Hartwell and Associates. By afternoon, rumors were circulating through the firm about professional conduct investigations and potential disciplinary actions. Adrienne came home that evening looking defeated. "They suspended Stephen pending a full investigation," she said. "His clients have been reassigned, and he's been banned from the office." "That's unfortunate. Tom, you're destroying an innocent man's career." "Stephen isn't innocent. He's an attorney who pursued a married woman, helped her lie to her family, and created liability issues for his firm. Those are the facts. The facts are that two people fell in love and made mistakes while trying to handle a complicated situation. The facts are that two people decided their desires were more important than their responsibilities. We were back to arguing from our respective positions, each defending interpretations of reality that served our emotional needs. But the practical consequences were becoming clear. Stephen's career was in jeopardy, Adrienne's reputation at the firm was damaged, and our divorce was going to be public and contentious. "What will it take for you to stop this?" she asked. "Nothing. You started something that can't be stopped. Now we all get to see how it ends." That night, I lay in bed thinking about consequences and justice and the various ways people pay for their choices. Adrienne had wanted space to process her feelings about a fake pregnancy, time to plan her exit from our marriage, freedom to pursue a relationship with another man. I'd given her the space she requested. Now she was learning that some spaces are larger and lonelier than others. The processing was just beginning.